A heavy rain drummed against the sagging porch outside the Bellinger family's farmhouse, pushing September into a raw, restless night in rural western Pennsylvania. By the battered mailbox, a rusted pickup idled as chewing tobacco spat on the gravel signaled the clock's approach to midnight. Inside, college sophomore Louisa Pritchard stared at her cell phone, willing it to ring. She glanced out the window, where the storm made everything look a little warped and unfamiliar. It had been 17 years since the night that broke their lives open, swallowing 3 high school friends, Louisa, Caroline, and Tracy, in a mystery that their families still tried to piece together from memory and rumor. Before we go deeper, don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries, and let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? We want to hear your stories too. It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday in August 2006. The friends had been inseparable since 4th grade, the kind of trio you saw laughing in the back booth at Main Street Diner or crowding onto the same porch swing at sleepovers. That evening, their parents remembered the usual bustle, casserole dishes in hand, girls rushing between bedrooms, dreaming aloud about road trips, college, and a future they assumed would always include one another. Louisa's father, Glenn, grilled corn on the porch, while Tracy's mother combed her daughter's hair, braiding it neatly for the party they planned to attend at the Township Hall by Macadam Road. Few can forget the last flashes of normalcy. The trio ducking out the back door, Tracy glancing back with a smirk, Caroline calling out that they had to stop by the gas station for snacks. There was no fear that night, no sense that the world could tilt on its axis in the space of a sunset drive. The panic began at dawn. The Township Hall party ended by midnight. Friends remembered them lingering by the soda machine, then drifting outside near the edge of the woods. No texts went through. Phones rang straight to voicemail. By 2:30 a.m., mothers were making frantic calls, fathers driving the empty streets in circles, headlights catching on rain-slithered roads, searching for anything out of place. By morning, a single set of tire tracks veered off Pine Mill Road near a collapsed wooden fence. The tracks disappeared into the mud. There were no signs of the girls, no fragments of clothing or pieces of torn poster board from the party. For weeks, search teams combed the river and the woods. Helicopters buzzed over the cornfields. Search dogs barked along creeks. Flyers, posters, and milk cartons soon carried blurry, grinning photos of all 3 girls. Louisa's sharp, angular cheekbones, Tracy's dimpled smile, Caroline's upturned nose. The case dominated news cycles. Rumors churned at the diner, whispers about a blue sedan with tinted windows, a stranger seen at the party, a fight that never happened. False leads sprang up and withered. By Thanksgiving, prayers were said over empty seats, and by Christmas, the town's name was forever linked to the 3 missing girls, frozen in local folklore. Years passed. One by one, the families changed. Glenn Pritchard kept the porch light burning every night. Tracy's brother joined the state police. Caroline's family moved away, leaving their old house trimmed in peeling blue paint, hoping for less painful beginnings. In early 2023, life's routines had nearly overtaken the gnawing ache of not knowing. Louisa's older sister, now a nurse in Erie, still scanned faces on missing persons websites during her night shifts. Glenn had a ritual of pausing beside the missing person flyers still taped to convenience store windows, straightening them before buying his coffee. Then, just weeks before the anniversary, something unimaginable shattered the uneasy quiet. A supermarket clerk in Ohio, restocking dairy shelves, texted her manager, "I think there's something wrong with this carton." She had noticed a missing person alert, the kind printed in the empty spaces below the expiration date, featuring a girl with a high, worried forehead, wide-set brown eyes, and a faint scar above her eyebrow. The photo was dated 2006, but impossibly, the woman staring at it knew that face, because it was hers. Louisa Pritchard, listed officially as missing for 17 years, stood transfixed in the fluorescent-lit aisle, watching strangers shuffle past as if nothing had happened. She reached for the carton as if in a dream. The world swayed. Her hands shook. She could have been any shopper. Instead, her picture, younger, untouched by 17 years, stared back, the caption reading, "Last seen, August 19th, 2006, Western Pennsylvania. If found, call local authorities." Louisa blinked, heart hammering, memories ricocheting. For years, she'd inhabited a new identity, convinced herself that her past was unrecoverable, her old life just a jagged, half-remembered story. But the face on the carton forced it all back. The storm, the headlights, the crunch of tires on gravel, Caroline's laughter dissolving into fear, a panicked voice yelling from the darkness. Louisa bought the milk and left, stumbling into a world suddenly turned inside out. She went home, locking the door behind her, and dropped the carton on the kitchen table as if it might explode. Sitting down, she grappled with the faces, hers and the other two, tangled in a mystery that had followed her every new city, every name change, and recently, the impossible urge to come home. Louisa pulled out an old shoebox from under her bed, one she'd carried through every move. It contained a single postcard, unsigned, postmarked 2 months after the night they vanished. Its faded image showed Pine Mill Road, the old township sign leaning into the weeds, captioned in block letters, "You can't outrun the truth." Louisa sat, weeping, staring at both her own face and the two others lost to her. She understood this was not just a story about disappearance, but of secrets, cover-ups, and the desperate need for answers, not just for her, but for all the families and friends who had never stopped searching. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the streets clean, as if nothing had ever happened at all. The news broke locally before it made the national rounds. By the next afternoon, Glenn Pritchard received an anonymous call. A woman's voice, wavering but determined, said, "I saw the face too. This isn't over. Meet me where the road bends." Glenn froze, recognizing instantly the cadence, the lilt his daughter never lost, even after all these years. The investigation, long thought dormant, gained fresh life. A media frenzy erupted as authorities and amateur sleuths descended on the small community, passing security footage, chasing leads and debating, had all 3 friends survived? If Louisa was alive, what happened to Tracy and Caroline? Why did she vanish, and why return now? Rumors boiled over. Some insisted Louisa was hiding from someone or something. Others claimed the girls had been seen on the night of the disappearance, stepping into a blue sedan near the old feed store. Detectives reopened witness interviews. Old classmates, now adults with kids of their own, were called back, their memories prodded, their silence heavy. Whispered secrets and lies as old as the cornfields began to surface, and the fragile peace of 17 years was gone. In the middle of it all, Louisa stood braced against a flood of questions. When Glenn arrived at their old meeting place under the leaning willow by Blue Brook, the air was thick and metallic with rain. Father and daughter stared at each other like they had aged a lifetime. In that moment, words weren't needed, only the truth would do. But the truth, Louisa realized, was even more complicated than anyone could imagine. And as she finally began her story, the storm outside faded, replaced by the brittle hush of people straining to hear every word. The first question was the hardest. "Where have you been, Lou?" Her mouth trembled as she began to speak, her voice unraveling the secrets that had long shadowed the missing girls last night together. Louisa's words came slow at first, each syllable dragged from a place she had locked away for nearly 2 decades. Glenn stood motionless, rain dripping from the brim of his cap, his face a landscape of hope and dread. She told him about the party that night, the laughter that felt endless, the music spilling from the township hall into the humid August air. But she also told him about the moment everything changed. They had been walking toward Tracy's car when a figure emerged from the shadows near the tree line. At first, they thought it was someone from school, maybe a boyfriend playing a prank. But the voice was unfamiliar, rough and urgent. The man said there had been an accident down the road, that someone was hurt and needed help. Caroline, always the first to offer kindness, started toward him. Tracy hesitated. Louisa grabbed her arm, instinct screaming that something was wrong. Then headlights flooded the clearing. A blue sedan, just like the rumors had always suggested, rolled up fast. The back door swung open. The man who had spoken now held something metallic that caught the moonlight. Louisa remembered the cold press of a hand on her shoulder, the smell of cigarette smoke and motor oil, and then the world tilting as she was shoved into the back seat beside Caroline and Tracy. The drive felt endless. They passed through darkness, the roads unfamiliar, winding through forests and hills that seemed to lead nowhere. Tracy cried quietly. Caroline whispered prayers. Louisa pressed her face to the window, trying to memorize landmarks, anything that could help them later. But fear made everything blur. They were brought to a farmhouse, isolated and crumbling, surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon. Inside, the air was stale and thick with decay. The man who had taken them was joined by a woman, her face hard and lined, her eyes empty of sympathy. They were told to sit, to stay quiet, to cooperate. When Tracy demanded to know why they had been taken, the woman slapped her so hard her lips split open. For days, they were kept in a basement room with a single barred window. They slept on thin mattresses, ate stale bread and canned soup, and whispered plans of escape that never materialized. The couple who held them spoke little, but Louisa overheard enough to piece together fragments. Debts owed, people looking for leverage, a ransom that never came through. The girls were not victims of random violence. They were collateral in a deal gone wrong. On the fourth night, everything collapsed. Voices upstairs turned into shouts, glass shattered, gunfire cracked through the walls. Louisa heard the woman scream, heard heavy footsteps pounding overhead. In the chaos, the basement door swung open, left unlocked in the rush. The three girls bolted, scrambling up the stairs and into the night. They ran through the fields, their feet tearing on stubble and stones, their lungs burning. Behind them, the farmhouse erupted in flames, orange light clawing at the sky. They didn't stop until they reached a highway, flagging down a truck driver who stared at them like they were ghosts. But here, Louisa's voice broke. She looked at her father, tears streaming down her face, and said the part that had haunted her ever since. "Dad, they told us we couldn't go back. They said if we told anyone, if we went to the police, they would kill our families. They knew your names. They knew where you lived. They had pictures." The truck driver, a man named Raymond who hauled freight between states, listened to their story and made a decision. He took them to a woman he knew in Ohio, someone who ran a shelter for people fleeing dangerous situations. She gave them new identities, forged documents, and a chance to disappear. But there was a cost. They could never contact their families, never return home, never reveal what had happened. Caroline and Tracy agreed immediately, terrified and exhausted. Louisa hesitated, but the fear was too great. They split up within weeks. Caroline went west, Tracy headed south, and Louisa stayed in Ohio, building a life from scraps and silence. For 17 years, she had lived under a different name, working quiet jobs, moving when the nightmares became too loud. She avoided mirrors, avoided photographs, avoided anything that might remind her of the girl she used to be. But the guilt never faded. She thought about her family every single day, wondered if they had moved on, wondered if they hated her for vanishing without a trace. Then, in the supermarket aisle, everything changed. Seeing her own face on the milk carton shattered the illusion that she could stay hidden forever. The past had found her, and she knew she couldn't run anymore. Glenn listened, his face carved with grief and disbelief. When Louisa finished, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You're home now," he whispered. "You're safe. We'll figure this out." But even as he spoke, Louisa knew the danger wasn't over. The people who had taken them, the ones who had threatened their families, were still out there. And now that she had come forward, now that the story was unraveling, they would be watching. Within hours, the authorities descended. FBI agents, local detectives, even cold case specialists who had followed the disappearance for years. Louisa repeated her story, answering questions until her voice went hoarse. They asked about the farmhouse, about the man and woman who had held them, about any details she could remember. She described the blue sedan, the isolated roads, the smell of burning wood and gasoline. Investigators launched a coordinated search. They combed through old property records, looking for abandoned farmhouses in the regions Louisa described. They reviewed missing persons reports from the same time period, cross-referencing cases that might be connected. They interviewed Raymond, the truck driver, who confirmed his role in helping the girls disappear. The woman who ran the shelter was harder to find, her trail deliberately obscured, but eventually they located her, and she corroborated the story. The media coverage exploded. News outlets across the country picked up the story, dissecting every detail, speculating endlessly. Louisa's face, older now, but unmistakably the same, appeared on screens everywhere. The public reaction was divided. Some hailed her as a survivor, brave for coming forward. Others questioned why she had stayed silent for so long, why she hadn't trusted the authorities to protect her family. But the most urgent question remained: where were Caroline and Tracy? Louisa provided what little she knew. Caroline had mentioned going to California, maybe San Diego or Los Angeles. Tracy had talked about the Gulf Coast, somewhere warm where she could start over. But those were just fragments, plans whispered in the dark before they scattered. The FBI launched a nationwide search, issuing alerts, contacting agencies across multiple states. They reached out to shelters, social services, anyone who might have encountered women matching their descriptions. Tips flooded in, hundreds of sightings, most of them false leads. But a few stood out. A woman in New Orleans working at a small bookstore bore a striking resemblance to Tracy. A teacher in Phoenix had facial features that matched Caroline's old photographs. Agents followed up on each lead, conducting interviews, comparing fingerprints and dental records where possible. Meanwhile, Louisa faced the hardest task of all, reconnecting with the family she had left behind. Her mother, who had passed away 6 years earlier, never knowing her daughter was alive. Her younger brother, now married with children of his own, who struggled to reconcile the sister he remembered with the stranger standing before him. Friends who had mourned her, who had built lives around the absence she had left. The reunion was painful and awkward, filled with tears and silences that stretched too long. Louisa tried to explain, tried to make them understand the impossible choice she had faced. But how do you justify 17 years of silence? How do you ask forgiveness for a grief you caused, even if you didn't choose it? Glenn stood by her, steady and unwavering. He told anyone who would listen that his daughter had done what she thought was right, that she had been protecting them even as it tore her apart. But even he couldn't erase the years, couldn't undo the damage. As the investigation deepened, new details emerged. Detectives identified the farmhouse based on Louisa's description and satellite imagery from 2006. It had burned to the ground that night, just as she remembered, but the remnants still held clues. Forensic teams sifted through ash and debris, finding bone fragments, shell casings, and charred remnants of documents. The bones were analyzed. They belonged to 2 individuals, both adults, both deceased for approximately 17 years. DNA testing was inconclusive, degraded by time and fire, but investigators believed they had found the remains of the man and woman who had held the girls captive. But who were they? And who had killed them? The answer came from an unexpected source. A retired detective reviewing old case files noticed a connection. The farmhouse had been owned by a man named Vincent, a small-time criminal with ties to organized crime in Pittsburgh. He had been involved in extortion, loan sharking, and kidnapping for ransom. In 2006, he had been working with a woman named Marla, his partner in multiple schemes. According to informants from that era, Vincent and Marla had been involved in a failed extortion plot. They had taken the girls hoping to leverage them for money, but the plan had collapsed when their criminal associates decided the risk was too great. A rival faction, worried about the attention the kidnapping would bring, had taken matters into their own hands, eliminating Vincent and Marla before the situation spiraled further. The girls had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a web of criminal dealings they never understood. Armed with this information, investigators began tracking down surviving members of the criminal network. Some had died, others were in prison, but a few were still out there, living quiet lives under assumed names. Slowly, painfully, the pieces of the puzzle came together. And then, 3 weeks after Louisa's revelation, came the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. A woman walked into a police station in Galveston, Texas, holding a milk carton with a familiar face printed on the side. She was thin, her hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling. She told the officer at the desk that she needed to speak to someone about a missing person case from 2006. Her name, she said, was Tracy.